Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode I'm going to be looking at this TriAng TT gauge railway T8 electric train set, which dates from either 1958 or 1960. Now look at that box illustration there, what a layout that is. And that's all TT gauge, I believe. So we open the box and we're met with a load of paperwork. This is all period paperwork from the very early 60s. This is a dealer directory for TriAng in the United Kingdom and indeed the world. At the back there is world model shops. And looking through it, I wonder how many of these model shops actually survive today, 60 years on. I bet there's not many listed here that are still operating, unfortunately. Now we've got, this is instructions and information. If that's the date there, 14/12/61, 1961, this goes on about servicing, lubrication, possible track layouts, how to use the TT gauge track, etc. Hints on running. Very, very comprehensive instruction sheet. Much more comprehensive than anything you get nowadays. And then there's an instruction manual. Now this is for a T1 set dated 18th of March 1960. Now the T1 set is also in the box, and that will feature in a future video. That is a Class 31 goods freight set. So let's have a look at this. This is the Southern Region Merchant Navy train set. No controller. The bottle of lubricating oil is missing, but we've got a Merchant Navy Pacific Clan line and 3 Mark 1s, and this is in the TT gauge that TriAng did. And as this dates from either 1958 to 1960, this puts this at 64 years old, and it is by far the oldest thing I've worked on in Trash to Track, if I recall. This would have been in the shops when my granddad was a teenager, or very early teens. I've also got this that was part of the collection. This is a Mark 1 green restaurant car, so I'm going to do that as well to complete the set. So we'll have a 4-car train running around at the end of this video, hopefully. But we'll put that to one side and we'll come back to the carriages later. The carriages in the set all seem to be in good condition. There is the odd missing coupling hook, which seems to be very common with this TT stuff. Regular viewers will remember I got this as a gems or junk. A massive lot of TT stuff, one of the first gems or junk we did. And I've decided to do this up, and this video should go out on New Year's Eve. Now the track's in relatively good condition, although there is one curve, there's 2 curves missing, and there's several broken pieces. Now one of the curves is made up of 2 half curves, and I'm going to have to look through the box of track to see if I can replace the missing curve later on. This is all steel track, and much like the train set we did a week or so ago, this will all be cleaned up. And hopefully I'll be able to run this train on its original track. I'm not sure if these TriAng TT will run on the new, more modern TT 120 that Hornby does. So let's have a look at the Merchant Navy. We're going to give it a quick battery test, but before we do, I'm going to stand it next to my 501 Squadron just to give you an example of the size difference. Now, obviously my Battle of Britain is 00 gauge, 4mm to the foot, and Clan Line is TT gauge, which is 3mm to the foot. If TriAng had adopted this as a standard size, many layouts would be a lot bigger, be able to house a lot more stock. So I've cleaned these 2 pieces of track up just to try and test this Merchant Navy. I've not actually tested this since we unboxed it in that Gems or Junk, and I've had it here for a couple of years now. But giving it a battery test, it does run, but it's very, very sluggish. It is running, obviously, but it's not showing any signs of being very sprightly. So let's open this up and see what we can do. Now this is the first time I've worked on anything TriAng TT gauge. And by the look of it, to remove the body, we have to undo this screw in the funnel. And this turned out to be a rather long screw. But once it's loose, the body shell lifts off and we have the motor, etc. Not too dissimilar to the X04 setup, although this motor is actually a T60 motor. Now I've seen this type of motor before, and I've got one in my spare stash, and this actually comes off the early Hornby Railways turntables. You can get these motors, so if you're ever looking for a motor for one of these, pick up a turntable, and as long as it's working, you can use these motors. They are a direct replacement. Now this one I've serviced, this is off a turntable and this runs fine. So if the motor that's in the model presently is no good, I've got a spare. To release the motor from the model, you have to undo the screw at the rear as per normal with TriAng, and the motor gently slides away, and there's an insulation sleeve on one of the brushes which you have to remove the wire from, pretty much the same as a standard TriAng XO 3 and 4 motor. So now that's released the motor. It is very, very dirty. The brushes aren't too badly worn considering how old this is. There's a bit of fluff and gunk all wrapped around the armature there. And these brushes look to be quite dirty, so we're going to have to strip this down and give it a thorough clean up. The magnetism on the model is very, very good still, so I'm not going to remagnetise it at this time. Using the cotton bud and methylated spirits, I'm going to clean all this up. I've removed the brushes now and I'm cleaning the commutator. First with the cotton bud, as I said, and then as normal I'm going to give it a final polish up gently with the fiberglass pencil. This will polish all the brass parts up nicely. And then once I've done this, I'm going to go through the gaps in the commutator with a toothpick, which I've chamfered the edge off with a scalpel. And there is quite a bit of buildup of carbon in the gaps, so that all needs cleaning out, otherwise it can lead to poor running and maybe even short circuits. But now I'm going to get another cotton bud and I'm going to go under here, and the amount of gunk and grease that comes off where this worm drive is in a moment is phenomenal. It really is a dirty model. And I wonder if this has been serviced or cleaned since it left the factory at TriAng in 1960 maybe. It's strange to think that this model was in the shops and, before my mum and dad were born. It's quite a phenomenal piece of kit really, and it has survived in remarkably good condition. So I'm cleaning the brushes up obviously with the cotton bud and meths, as you can see there. There is nothing in the way of lubrication or oil on this model. There's no remnants of it. It is just thick black dirt. So now with the pin dropper, now everything's been cleaned, I'm just dropping some oil on the bearings in the side of the motor there. There is no felt pads as such on this model. I'm still finding bits of hair and fluff on that armature even after cleaning. I add a little bit of oil on it, and then I'm going to put the brushes back in on the spring and make sure one side is insulated. Test it with a battery and it is spinning lovely and strong and relatively quiet for one of these. So the motor that was in the original motor that was in the model is good to go. We can refit this. So now I'm going to have a look at the chassis. There's a lot of dust and detritus in this, so I'm going to give it a brush out. Brush all the top there to remove all that fluff. And I'm going to also remove this base plate here because I need to clean the pickups and see what the status of the bearings or the wheels are. Before I do that, I remove the front and rear pony wheels. And then I will remove the two screws that remove the base keeper plate. Now when I remove the base keeper plate, I am pleasantly surprised with this model because TriAng models of this era, the wheels were pushed through the chassis, and to remove the axles you had to remove one of the wheels. Now on this TriAng TT model you don't have to do that. What I'm doing here is I'm just cleaning the wheels of the rear pony truck. You can see there the amount of dirt I actually scraped off this model on the plate. I mean, that is just filthy. That is black dirt that is all wrapped around all of the plastic wheels. But as I was saying, you have to remove a wheel to remove the axles on 00 gauge TriAng stuff. But on the TT gauge stuff, the wheels just slot in holes in the chassis, which is a far better design for servicing and maintenance, as the whole wheel set just drops out and there's no need to remove any wheels whatsoever. So now I can properly clean the chassis up, and you can see there those brass coloured parts are where the wheels have actually worn the chassis away over the years. So with a cotton bud and meths, I'm now going to clean everything up on this chassis. I'm going to remove all remnants of this horrible black, I mean look at that horrible black dirt that's over everything. And this took a bit of cleaning up. I was going to give it a spray with the contact cleaner, but I persevered with the cotton bud and meths. And eventually, having cleaned all the axle runs out and everything, I end up with a thoroughly cleaned and degreased chassis block. So there are no proper bearings on this model. The wheels just sit in the cutouts in the chassis. I also cleaned the axles. The axles were a little bit sticky and gunky, so that was all cleaned out, and everything. And the wheel backs were also cleaned. Look at this. Look at the state of my fingers having cleaned the chassis and the wheels up. It's horrible, horrible black sticky mess. So I've temporarily put the wheels back in the chassis now, and I'm just going to push it along without a motor or pickup contacts, and it's running nice and freely, so there's no problems with the wheels or quartering. The base plate was also given a thorough clean, as this also had a coating of that horrible gunky blackness after being run for 60 years. One of the pickups was actually broken, but there was enough of the wire pickup left to bend it into place so it made contact with the wheel back and will provide ample and reliable electrical connectivity. So before I screw the base plate back on, I had a small amount of oil to those axles, because now obviously it's been thoroughly cleaned, so everything is very dry. So I add a small amount to all the axles, roll the wheels around to make sure it's evenly coated, and then the base keeper plate is screwed back on with the two brass screws that we removed earlier on. You don't want to over tighten these screws, as this plastic, it is quite old and it could be quite brittle, so if you over tighten them you will end up breaking it, which is not really what I don't want to do at this stage. I'm now cleaning the wheels on the front pony truck by scraping off all that horrible black gunk that has built up on them over the years, and I'm just scraping this off with the end of my flat bladed screwdriver. It works well in scraping all that horrible blackness off. And I've refitted them to the chassis now. Everything apart from the wheels have been cleaned, and it's time to reinstall the motor. Now this is just a push fit into the slots. I'm going to put some Lebel 106 on the worm gear, just to give some lubrication, as it's brass worm gear on a brass final gear, so the metal on metal will wear if it is not correctly lubricated. The motor is slotted back in place, and then that rear screw is reattached. Battery test on the motor brushes, and it is spinning the wheels lovely. That will spread the grease and oil through the drivetrain, and hopefully it will result in some reliable running. So I reattached the brush lead there to the insulated brush, connect it up to some leads off a controller, and as I did with the TriAng 08 a couple of episodes ago, the wheels turning against a brass brush will clean themselves, and the wheels end up polishing themselves against the brass brush. This is a lot less harsh than using a multi-tool on it, and as the model is running, it's self-cleaning its wheels. And the wheels go from a heavily oxidized black state to being lovely and shiny. And whilst doing this, I found out that one of the rear wheels there has got a groove in it from running. It's actually ran that much in its lifetime that the tyre tread has worn, and the track has worn a groove in the wheel. To reattach the body shell, you put a clip in under the foot plate, line the screw up in the funnel, and screw the model back together. Now, that is the model fully serviced and overhauled, but there is a slight bit of body damage. One of the pillars in the window is broke there, so using my long nose or tweezer nose pliers, I gently realign this without breaking the plastic off, and then using some plastic weld cement, I just brush it on with a paintbrush, and capillary action takes it into the cracks, and then when it's dry, those window frames are now solid and the body shell has been repaired. The tender was pretty much the same. This was a little bit grubby, but I don't want to clean it aggressively on the outside because I don't want to remove those transfers or the heat print on there. So I'm going to just dust it over, and again, same as the pony wheels, the wheels were cleaned by scraping the muck off them. This time I used a cocktail stick, as there was nowhere near as much dirt on the tender wheels as there was on the front loco wheels. But turning them by hand, it was nothing more than scraping the plastic off, and then brushing them over with a cotton bud that was dipped in warm soapy water this time, not the meths, because I didn't know whether or not the meths would react to the old plastic. Now, putting the tender and loco back on the track, remember before this was a very, very sluggish runner. It ran, but it was really slow. And now with the battery test, the Merchant Navy is extremely responsive and runs really, really nice. It's got that nice sound to it that these models from this era have. And it is back to fully working, fully overhauled order. So now the loco's been sorted, I'm going to turn my attention to the rolling stock. And the coaches were in generally good condition, like I said, apart from the odd missing coupling hook. There was a few bits of fluff and cobwebs on the underside. So using my dry paintbrush, I just brushed them over, made sure there wasn't anything catching on the wheels or any buildup of dirt on the wheels by just running them round with a cocktail stick. And there wasn't much really in the way of dirt on the wheels at all, nothing like there was on the Loco and Tender. So I worked my way through the coaches. There's the brake coach, that's virtually done. One of the composite coaches, again, this was just dusted. There's a massive load of fluff there that I've just pulled off that axle. And all the axles were examined for build-ups of hair and fluff. Because the axles on these coaches, there's a metal axle rod and the wheels are two-piece plastic parts. Now on this next coach, you will see in between the wheels there is a lot of fibre build-up. And I was unable to pull it out with my fingers. It was so tightly wrapped around the axle. So I try and pull it out with these tweezers and those pliers, but I just cannot get a proper grip on it. And I want to remove it because that will add friction. And I just want it cleaned. So I'll come back to that. This is the restaurant car out of the separate box. Now this is a lot cleaner. The only thing that this suffers with, as do most models from TriAng of this era, you can see there that the curtains don't quite match up with the windows, and that is because the acetate has shrunk over the last 60 years. So to clean this axle, going back to this, what I did was I gently tapped it out with a pin hammer and then used my pliers just to pull the axle out of the bogies. These have open axle boxes on the bogies, and it stuck to the pliers there. But when I remove the wheels, that horrific bird's nest of fluff and hair also comes away. There we go, it's on the end of my finger. That goes in the bin, and I'm going to just give this a general clean up. I check all the other axles, but that was the only one with that fluff on it. So there's the axle, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to re-thread it through the open axle holes, make sure I line the wheels up correctly, and then when everything is aligned up, I get an old scribing screwdriver that I've blunted the end of, and then just push that axle back through, checking to make sure it's seated correctly and that the wheels turn freely. So that's the rolling stock done. As I said, not much to do on that, just a general dust and cleanup. So turning my attention to the track, anybody that watched that train set episode I did at Christmas time, I'm going to use the same method. These sleepers were super glued back onto the rail bases and then clamped in place and left for 24 hours so that I could repair the track. But the bits that weren't damaged, these were given a clean up with 1200 grit wet and dry paper. Obviously I use it dry because it's steel track. Clean the tops of the rails until they are very, very nice and shiny. And using 1200 grit ensures that there is minimal scratches and marks on top of the railhead. But doing it this way, it will remove 99% of the oxidization, and it will give the rails a nice shiny finish. And then just to remove any detritus that's left over, bit of methylated spirits on my cleaning cloth, and I clean each and every single piece of track individually, and now that is nice and shiny and hopefully will be back into use. And I also check and make sure no fish plates are missing. So here's another demonstration of the size differences between 00 on the left and TT on the right. This is when I did that freight set, LNER set. I filmed these on the same day. So there the size difference between the B12 and the Merchant Navy is apparent. I do think the TT size is probably a better size, but I get the feeling that 00 gauge now is so well established in this country, I really can't see TT taking off anytime soon. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look at getting it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So here we go, the Merchant Navy train set from TriAng Railways TT gauge, running around 60 years old. This train set is at least 60 years old, and after a full service, which, let's be honest, wasn't too tasking, a full service and clean up, and it is running like a Swiss watch, albeit a little bit noisy, but then everything from this era seems to. So I'll leave you now with some shots of the Merchant Navy running around. Happy New Year to you all, and thank you so much for watching Trash to Track throughout this year. I appreciate all the likes, shares and subscribes, and thank you for supporting the channel again. So I'll see you all in 2025. Have a good one, folks. Bye for now.